say welcome everybody to today's Lunch and Learn Spotlight session, final session for 2025. And as I was saying, I'm Madeline McAleer, Training, Research and Development Director with Haven Horizons. And Haven Horizons is a national DSGBV prevention organisation. So in terms of just giving a little recap about Lunch and Learns, our Lunch and Learns were developed as part of our virtual community of practice, and where we network academics, frontline professionals, survivors, and others involved in the domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence field. We try and share and exchange the knowledge we have from all those different areas. And so we host the Lunch and Learns as part of that process within the virtual community practice. So today, I'm going to take the opportunity to spotlight our 2025 speakers and the key messages that they imparted to us before we head into 2026. So that's all the speakers we had this year, and we had Hazel Catherine Larkin, who was our first spotlight session presenter in 2025. And Hazel is a mother, an academic, a researcher, and an author who lectures internationally on sexual rape and trauma. And she also runs programs for women who were sexually abused as children. And Hazel spoke to us about her book that she's written, the memoir she's written about her own experiences. Her book is called Body of Evidence. And really, I suppose to encapsulate what Hazel was saying was really about the importance of trauma-informed practice when working with people who've experienced childhood sexual abuse, and also, of course, any form of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. And that would be Hazel's key working in that area. So then we had Dr. Niamh Maguire from the Southeast Technological University, who spoke to us in March and in July. People were really interested in her input, so we had so many queries that we brought Niamh back to give us a further presentation. And her presentation was on her groundbreaking research that was commissioned by the Judicial Council. And Niamh's research, it really did provide people with, I suppose, fascinating insights into the judiciary's approach to domestic abuse sentencing. And really, the recommendations from Niamh's research underscored the urgent need for judicial training, to specialised training on domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. And this is something that has been reiterated again and again over the years, but to actually have this piece of research where Niamh was able to interview judges and for them to be saying that as well, which is a fantastic leap forward. Then we had Mary Louise Lynch, who also presented in March. And Mary Louise, I think a lot of you probably know her. She's a survivor advocate, a feminist, an activist, and she's the founder of CC, Survivors Informing Services and Institutions. And she gave us, I suppose, a really valuable personal insight into navigating the family courts and highlighting the systemic gaps and the pressing need for additional support for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence victims who are going through any court proceeding. And because of the nature of our court system and the trauma, the re-traumatizing that happens when people have to enter any area of the court system. So on the next slide, we have Danielle Roberts and Noelle Collins. Danielle from Reclaim the Agenda and Noelle from Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. And they spoke to us separately. And Danielle and Noelle are our Northern Ireland partners on our 5 Books project, our 5 Books That Could Save Your Life. And that is, I heard you just speaking as I came into the room there about that project, which ended last week with a webinar, an international webinar with the authors, which we had really good attendance for and lots of really positive feedback from the attendees and from the authors, they were delighted to be on the platform with each other and to be talking about the issue. So to focus on Danielle, Danielle is a policy worker and a feminist activist advocating for LGBTQIA plus and women's rights. And she is a co-organizer of Reclaim the Night Belfast and a co-convener of the Alliance for Choice Belfast. And her presentation, I suppose, really highlighted the importance of activism and I suppose, and that's really a role. If you think the Reclaim the Night was sort of it was a activism that started in the 70s, and there is still that need to continue that type of activism today. So that was a really interesting presentation as well. And then Noelle Collins, she's a senior manager in Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid, and one of the roles that Noelle plays is that she contributes to domestic homicide reviews in Northern Ireland and has really been able to share a lot of insights with us during the Five Books Project. And of course, because we don't have domestic homicide reviews here in the Republic, those insights are really important. And then after that, Noelle also discussed the tactics used by perpetrators of domestic abuse and some of the common barriers, which are common, I suppose, it's an all-island, an international thing that there are barriers, but then the intersectional nature of those barriers when people are trying to leave abusive relationships. And Noelle has had a long career in this area and was able to speak very knowledgeably about that. And then on the next slide, we have myself and Sarah. We did an input on Sarah Hart. We did an input on the 5 books that could save your life, highlighting why the project was set up and what our aims were and the books that we chose for that project. And then the fact that we had 3 in-person panel discussions, the first one in Ennis at the Book Club Festival, then 2 in Belfast, 1 at the Titanic Centre and 1 in Queen's. And our last in-person event was in the atrium in the Department of Justice in October, where we had Stephanie O'Keefe, the CEO of Coen, was a keynote speaker at that. So, and then, as we said, we finished the project with the webinar with the authors. So the next slide then. Oh yes, Katerina has chosen some little clips, and the first one she's chosen is one of myself and Sarah speaking. And
yes. What about Brutally Honest? What stands out for you about that?
Well, I remember the 80s and the girl power, and that this was a band that was putting forward, that young women can have what they want and do what they want.
I think, was it?
Okay, I don't know, because I didn't really follow them. Like I was born in the 60s, so around that time it's all the same to me. But I mean, so what we actually learn in retrospect is that here was this rich, famous pop star, but behind the scenes, behind the closed door, she lost complete control of every aspect of her life, and she was targeted at a very vulnerable time. So personally and professionally, everything she did was controlled. Her children, what she ate. He was encouraging her to drink and use drugs, videoing her, telling her that she would lose custody of her children. He had total control of her bank account. I mean, it's really the image-based abuse, the technology-based abuse, the drugs and alcohol. It's a really difficult read.
She really brought home that very complex nexus between addiction and domestic abuse, and how, I suppose, addiction can be a response on the part of the victim to the situation they find themselves in, but how it can be also leveraged by the abuser, both during the relationship, which is what happened to Mel B, being encouraged to use or to drink or whatever your addiction is, and then leveraged afterwards to construct the victim as unfit, be that as a mother or whatever.
So Shane White, he was a senior investigator with GSOC. Okay, there's a sound toggle. Okay. He was a senior investigator with GSOC, which is now called FISRU. And he has subsequently moved on to another agency. I think he's gone to Europe to Interpol. He led a team responsible for investigating public complaints against Gardaí. He also headed up the specialist unit at FISARU, which had the aim of professionalising investigations into complaints of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse victims. He highlighted the benefits of staff training and adopting a victim-led approach to responding to DV complaints. And Shane actually did the level 6 course and brought that knowledge back to FISARU because they're setting up a new unit. And he actually shared some really interesting insights and things that I wouldn't have been aware of about I suppose the role of GSOC/FISARU, and that people who experience domestic, sexual, gender-based abuse whose partner is a guard, they can elect to have GSOC/FISARU investigate their case and not the local Gardaí, or they can stay with the local service if they're finding that work is working for them. So I thought that was really important. And next up, we have Roisin Shanahan from the Southeastern Technological University. And Roisin is the Sexual Violence and Harassment Prevention and Response Manager in SETU. And those units, Roisin focuses on education, creating bespoke training for staff, awareness raising campaigns, and tackling important issues such as consent and bystander intervention. And then Roisin outlined all the different measures that they are taking in SETU to provide that safe and supportive response to people who experience domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse on campus. And we have developed a collaborative partnership with SETU and delivered some training in SETU as well, and also input into the conference that they held. And then after that, we had Sinead Butler from Esker House. And Sinead is the coordinator of the community support team at Esker House. And they support women and their children subjected to domestic abuse. Sinead was a member of An Garda Síochána for 20 years and has assisted families and victims of crime through the criminal trial process in the Circuit Court. Sinead gave us an in-depth review of civil restraining orders and comparing civil orders with domestic violence protection, barring and safety orders. And I know Sinead has been very good since she did that presentation. She's had some queries from other members of our virtual community of practice, and she has advised some people on the different processes. So that's been excellent. So I think the next slide is a clip of Sinead. So hopefully people will be able to hear it.
To compare it to DV orders, because that's all we had really before this in terms of getting an order, a protective order against somebody who's been subjected to abuse. So for the Domestic Violence Act orders, there needed to be some prior relationship, a family connection, shared children or property in order to qualify for a DV order. There's no fee to apply for a DV order or to get legal aid. So you can, if you come in under the income threshold, you don't pay anything to get an order under the Domestic Violence Act, and your dependents are included. Most orders are granted for an average of about 2 years, if it's extreme, 5 years for safety order. The civil restraining orders, a fee must be paid at €80, and legal aid isn't covered. It's not in it. Maybe it's just because it's new or it hasn't been recognised, but it's not deemed as domestic violence as such. No prior relationship needs to be in place to apply. The threshold, according to the courts and the judge, the few times I was in court, seems to be higher than that needed to grant a Domestic Violence Order Act. Locations can be named, places you frequent, be it a workplace, a school, where you live can be named in your order to prevent the offender from going to these places. Persons can be named who are connected to you, and it can last for up to 5 years. Now, I've only experience of 3 of these applications. One of them we have got a permanent one, and that was granted for 5 years based on the severity of it.
Okay, so I think we just played that little clip because I think a lot of people may not have been aware of the potential that civil restraining orders provide in the absence of being able to get a DV order. So then after that, we had Deirdre Benson, and Deirdre is the college nurse at TU Dublin in the Blanchardstown campus. And she's got a background in mental health and sexual health education. And she spoke to us about the role of the college nurse in supporting students who are at risk or have experienced the sexual violence, emphasizing the important, and again, lots of people spoke of the importance of training and education for staff in responding effectively to disclosures. And I had the opportunity actually to meet Deirdre in person because I was in Dublin and I went to the Gate to See Poor, Katrina O'Sullivan's play, very, very powerful. And I think our next speaker has also seen it, Kelly. So it was lovely to meet Deirdre in person at that. So Kelly Birmingham is our next speaker, and I've had the opportunity to meet Kelly a number of times in person since we got to know her, and that's been fantastic as well. Nothing beats the personal. Online is great, but the personal interactions are fantastic. So Kelly, as I say, is the community liaison officer with St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, and she spoke to us about her personal involvement in community and charity work from a young age because her parents founded Alone, and a charity that supports older people living alone. Kelly also spoke about the high levels of domestic, sexual, and gender based violence in the community and how it overlaps with other problems. And Kelly is the safeguarding officer as well in St. Patrick's Cathedral. So she spoke to us about safeguarding issues that she's encountered with vulnerable members. And again, highlighted the need for domestic, sexual, and gender based violence training and a multi-agency collaborative approach when responding to disclosures. So the next slide then. And just while we're moving to the next slide, if I say that one of the things that we also do in Haven Horizons is we do run a level 6 recognising and responding to domestic abuse for frontline professionals. And I know quite a few people who are involved in the community of practice have done the course. It'll be running again in January 2026 through TUS, their flexible learning. So Gillian Dennehy, lead trainer with the Davina project, presented. The Davina project supports women affected by, I suppose, addiction and domestic abuse. And I know Gillian herself has a background as well with domestic homicide reviews. She's done a lot of work in the UK and was able to, give some input in when we had some discussions on domestic homicide reviews. But Gillian highlighted the unique intersectional challenges faced by victims of domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence who also have addiction issues, and that this co-experience, I suppose, the impact of it frequently goes unrecognized, and the difficulties that creates for victims. So then we had Kathleen Funchion, MEP, Sinn Féin MEP, and she really gave a very powerful account of her experience with her abusive ex-partner and the tactics used and the additional barriers faced by women in the public eye. And she really, shared the personal impact that the experience had on her and how it gave her a new perspective on domestic abuse. So then after that, we had Dr. Hilary McCollum, and Hilary spoke to us twice about 2 different things. So Hilary is an advocate, an activist, and a violence against women consultant. So in her first presentation, she highlighted the importance of domestic homicide reviews and the insights that she has gained from her work as an assessor on domestic homicides with the UK Home Office. Her second presentation was on how the arts can be used to create a world without violence against women, and she spoke very personally in that and spoke about her own memoir and the impact of abuse on her life and how it continues to have an impact, as you know, as most people who've experienced domestic sexual abuse can testify to, that it is an issue that does have you know, an impact beyond maybe when the courts are finished, or when we feel that, you know, we're out of the relationship. There's still trauma. So it was Hilary was talking about how the arts can actually help heal that trauma. So our last spotlight. Oh no, we have a video of Gillian, so we'll play that.
There was a report done then as well by UCD, a very powerful report by Mary Kennedy and others in 2023, a report examining whether human rights are negated for women in addiction when accessing domestic abuse support and refuge in Ireland. You can access that on the SAIL website. Needless to say, they did find women's human rights were negated. And what they found was a systemic state failure. The name of the report, they said they couldn't take me because I was on drugs. What they found was the literature and the experience of the women from the report indicate that it was virtually impossible for women who are actively using substances to access refuge support. And what they say in the report also as well is that women in addiction are not consistently treated the same as other females when they seek domestic abuse support and refuge. There is an over-focus on abstinence. An over-focus on women being stable. What does that mean? How can someone be stable when they're using drugs and alcohol to cope with what they're going through? It's an entirely unfair thing to ask of women. And we see in other jurisdictions like the UK, they've set up specialist refuges for women who use drugs and are subjected to domestic abuse. We have someone from the Naya Refuge coming over to speak at our conference happening in November.
Great. And I know, because we're playing a few clips, that we'll probably run over a little bit if people are okay to stay on, seeing as it's our last Lunch and Learn and it's a recap. But if you need to go, obviously. But there are some of the presenters here with us today, and I'm going to just ask them to say a word or two at the end. So this is a clip from Kathleen Function's very powerful input.
What I grapple with, I suppose, is that there were so many signs there that I didn't see, and so many red flags, jealousy, control, very serious issues with, in particular, one group of my friends I would have went to college with that were a very close group of friends for me. You know, when you're in the public eye, when you're elected, you probably are a little bit cautious, to be very honest, around, you know, who you let into your life and who you're speaking to. And this group of friends for me were people that knew me from years ago, from when we were all 18, and kind of knew everything about me. And I felt, you know, in a really, I suppose, safe space with them. And my ex-partner had a major difficulty with them, so much so that I even agreed, like, to stopped talking to them for one period of time, you know, left our group WhatsApp chat, always came up with other excuses as to why I was doing that. And I found that really, really difficult as well, that I felt like I was constantly on eggshells.
I think what she said there really, you know, talks about how incremental isolation can be. And she said she felt that she was trying to do what was right and fix things that he felt were wrong. And so that's a tactic we hear a lot when it comes to isolation, the justification for why you should move away from family or friends. So then the next slide and the next clip is the very powerful poem that Hilary read.
I guess one of the biggest lessons I've learned from chairing them is how difficult it is to get agencies to focus on the perpetrator. I will even tell them, right, we're just now going to spend the next half an hour talking about the perpetrator and what else agencies might have done to try and stop the behaviour so that it didn't lead to this death. And you'd be lucky if you get 2 or 3 minutes before we veer back to the victim. Agencies are much more comfortable talking about things that they could do to protect the victim, and not so comfortable about things that they might have done to disrupt the perpetrator's behaviour and to hold them to account. And I think that's a big issue. I think across different areas of the world, I think we are failing generally in many different countries to hold perpetrators effectively to account.
So sorry, that wasn't the clip of the poem. That's the clip, which I think is really, really something that, if we think about it, how everyone makes the perpetrator invisible, and how we really need to pivot to the perpetrator, and how difficult that is to get agencies and individuals to do that. So then after Lorna McCormick, and she's a business owner, an educator, and an activist, and an EU Climate Pact. Really interesting presentation on the links between climate change and gender-based violence. And she really demonstrated how victims of domestic, sexual, and gender-based abuse are particularly adversely affected by the results of climate change, and especially those who are already experiencing wealth inequality as well, how all those things come together to create a lot of problems. And in that month as well, we had Professor Maeve Owen, who outlined her work in the sexual assault treatment units. And she spoke to us about something that was, much talked about at the time, these rape self-testing kits. And she spoke to us about the problems and dangers of, using, in terms of follow through and evidence. And she's the clinical lead at SATU. She's an obstetrician, a gynecologist at the Rotunda Hospital, and an associate professor at UCD and the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. So it was great to get that input from Maeve and to get that overview of the SATU units. So after Maeve, we had Ruth Maxwell. And I know, yeah. So in fact, Ruth was our last presenter. And she gave us a really interesting overview of the criminal injuries compensation, the workings of the tribunal, and its limitations, and her own experience of needing to access the criminal injuries tribunal, and how traumatizing that experience was for her, and then how she has used that experience to now become an advocate for people who are actually going through the process, and she helps victims. And she outlined all the challenges, and then also the fact that she's working now at national and European level to make recommendations to make that process more accessible and more suitable for the needs of the victims, and really being very victim-led and aware of the vulnerabilities of victims who have to access the service. So I think we have one or two more clips. Katerina, do we? Yes, so we have a clip here of Ruth.
So my closing message: reform isn't about blame, it's about ensuring the next survivor isn't re-traumatized by the process that's meant to support them. Real reform begins when lived experience is valued as knowledge and not borrowed as evidence. Justice systems should repair rather than re-traumatize. So reform isn't about blame, it's about making sure no one else is re-traumatized. Lived experience is knowledge, and justice should be healing and not harmful.
So I think though, like Ruth as our last speaker, she really did encompass a lot of what the other speakers were saying when she was talking about the lived experience, and how that should be used, and how they're experts by experience. So okay, so that was all our speakers. And so we've just put up there our social media, and the fact that the recordings of the Lunch and Learn are posted to the virtual community of practice and to our YouTube channel. And you can follow us on our social media platforms and have a look at our website, havenhorizons.com. So I'm going to just round off by saying, to thank all the speakers for their, as you can see, very varied and valuable contributions. And I think you can go back and listen to the full inputs from people, and they really have the potential to be really transformative. So we're really thankful to Sharon for coordinating and organizing all the speakers and having them, getting their bios and setting us up to do that. And I'm going to open it up now to people who did speak, and I would just like to ask people, in their own work, what was their highlight in 2025, and what is their hope for 2026? So I'll open it up to whoever wants to start. Just put up your hand if you want to give an input. I can't see everyone. Let me just see. And you can, yeah, Kelly. Yeah, great.
All right, it would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that Haven Horizons have provided this platform as a community of practice, because I think if I was to highlight something that would be a highlight in the year, it's the fact that we have this virtual community of practice where people can come together and effectively collaborate and gain knowledge, understanding and perspectives from various different angles that cover the bell curve of low-level experiences right up to the catalyst incident, which usually leads to interventions and responses to the trauma of something that's going on, right through into post-abuse recovery. And as a community worker, particularly working within the cathedral, which tends to be, it's a place of sanctuary, a place where people can come and have a bit of headspace and a bit of quiet. It's quite often a place where people would first disclose or would have an opportunity to think their own thoughts uninterrupted. And so one of the gaps that I identify, I suppose, across the whole spectrum is the lack of prevention. And Haven Horizons, by creating this community, gives everybody insights along the journey so that we can work towards prevention. But one of the major gaps that I would love to see addressed is the gap between justice and what's right. Joe Brolly said in an interview that there's no such thing really as justice. It's just who gets the best story told on the day in the court, and who can read the jury, who can read the witnesses, who can get a story across to their best advantage. And sometimes that's down to who can afford it. And one of the endemic issues in relation to affordability is the fact that there's financial abuse in many cases and trauma that leads to huge levels of confusion. And I would love to see that mitigated, that the courts would implement a better system to provide a fairer sense of justice so that we have better outcomes, that when people do disclose, that is something that's done. But also the spread of responses and interventions are focused around the catalyst incident, where prevention is really much earlier. Prevention is going back to grassroots education in schools and in one of the, I suppose, the sort of formative relationship expectations. What forms a good relationship? What is permissible in a relationship? How do we form positive working relationships? When we don't have positive working relationships, like was demonstrated in Katrina Sullivan's dramatization of her book, which was so insightful. I mean, I recognize so many people as characters within her story of her own life that she articulated so well, and Susan Kelly adapted so well for stage, that it was utterly devastating. Because in my formative years, I had 5 classmates who were dead before I did my Leaving Cert, and I could identify the poverty signs, the abuse signs, the addiction signs that were endemic of a much bigger system against the positive life experiences that people can potentially have when they have a different privileged start in life. So I'd love to see that mitigated.
Yeah, and I think anyone who's had any contact with the court would just say 100% agree with that. And just to say that Katrina O'Sullivan's Poor has got such a great response that it's been rerun in the Gate in February, and I do think anyone who's the opportunity to get to see it should go to it. And I know Sharon was at it as well. Sinead, I see you've got your hand up there. Would you like to? So if anyone else wanted to put their hand up so that I can see who's Hillary. Yeah.
Thanks, Madeline. And I'd just like to thank you for this forum as well. It's been
Sinead, you're a little bit low for me anyhow, so
sorry.
can you just speak? That's
Sorry,
great.
can you hear?
That's,
Is that better? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'd just like to thank yourself and Sharon for even setting up this forum. It's been really informative and great for even making connections with different organisations. And I know you were asking about the highlights. There's been a good few highlights now in the sector for me in the last year. For our own service, we've expanded into the whole of Westmeath, and we've got funding secured for a new refuge with 12 units. So that's been phenomenal for us. For myself, I've done a lot of, I suppose, training and gone to different conferences, which provided huge learning. One of which was the one in Barcelona, which I know a few of you were at, and it was great to meet people in real life and connect and share ideas and learn more about what's been done on a European level. One of the conferences I attended during the year that really, I think, impacted me was the Women's Aid one up in Trinity College, where they highlighted the voices of women who had experienced domestic abuse and gone through the court system, and children. And this is still an issue, and this would be kind of my wish for next year, that courts will get more on board with understanding domestic abuse, the impact on women, the impact on children. And one of the things that stood out to me about the training in Trinity was kids who were interviewed said that they don't want to go on access because the abuse is there, and the orders are gotten that, and then it turns into the abuse has been extended to the access order, and they're being whatever way the abuse has just been redirected through the children, and children are wishing their lives away until they turn 18, that they don't have to go on this forced court access anymore. Judges are not getting it. They're not marrying up the fact that there's a DV order here and now there's an access order. They're not connecting the two together, and they're actually not listening to kids.
Yeah, the gaps in the court systems are really detrimental to children, dangerous. And that is something I think that there's a lot of different people looking at. Thank you, Sinead. Lovely to meet you in Barcelona. I can see that Gillian has her hand up there, and so has Hilary. So I'll go to Gillian and then Hilary after. So Gillian, and then I see Lorna. Gillian, do you want to? So your highlight and then your hopes.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hi, can you see me? Yeah, sorry. For some reason I wasn't.
Yeah. So what was your highlight?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks a million as well. Yeah, for providing the platform. I knew enough to the platform, and I missed the webinar last week, unfortunately, but I'm looking forward to watching the recording. And yeah, just I think, I'm looking forward to hopefully engaging more in next year with yourselves. So the highlight for us, I suppose, I think it's kind of cool in recognizing that, our work is essential and providing funding to expand our team. So now, since January, we do have now 3, Davina advocates, which are basically, Davina outreach workers working with women who, are subjected to domestic abuse and are using substances. And they bring, a lot to the roles, themselves having previously worked in addiction services as well. So and they obviously provide the same work as outreach workers, like court accompaniment, but also doing group work with the women, the psychoeducational toolkit that was created with our experts via experience. And they also do one-to-work with women as well. And I suppose, again, they're reaching, marginalized women who feel that a lot of the mainstream services are not there, not for them. In their own words. And I suppose as well, my role was funded, and I've been with SAIL, Davina Project since January. And I suppose a big thing for us is kind of looking at, right, there was so much done, when I arrived at SAIL. I was like, all this research had been done. There was so much for me, brilliant as a trainer to have all this material to use. It was kind of just bringing it together and kind of saying, well, what do we want to convey to people? How do we change hearts and minds with our training, And I suppose for us, for me, highlight is seeing that kind of light bulb moments for people, seeing that perhaps the training is hopefully having that impact and changing hearts and minds. One of those things was with a DV service, I could really see that people in the room were very committed to reviewing their acceptance policy for women, you know, in active addiction, and kind of looking at that and what they can do to improve upon that. And that's exactly what we want to do. You know, it's not just about, you know, you want to change hearts and minds, so then we can see actually policy and structural change for women and see a difference for women.
Yeah, you want the exchange of knowledge to change practice.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And you know, so that was really highlight for me. And I suppose another thing was actually a woman as well. We did a stigma exercise, and one woman said, you know, she realized that, you know, she had been, you know, had all these misconception presumptions about women and addiction, and we had challenged those, and she was really reviewing that. I thought it was a very honest key takeaway, but it was great as a trainer to hear that. And I think also just to say as well, you know, for addiction services, you know, seeing that they're kind of realizing and going, actually, yeah, you know, 90% to 100% of the women who come in through our door are survivors of domestic gender-based violence, and that's something, you know, that needs to be something that's not just additional to our addiction work, but that is something that's a priority, that we're always talking about it, and we're talking about it as a staff team as well, which is something I'm always encouraging as well. Like, this isn't just about the women you're working with, this is about, you know, your colleagues, your staff, everyone should be talking about it. You know, there's no shame, you know. And I suppose for the future, I suppose it's just, again, rolling out the training, rolling out our day 1 and day 2, and yeah, engaging more with the domestic violence sector as well. So that's it. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Gillian. And then I see Hilary and Lorna, and I think it's Mary. Yeah.
So I guess for me, that, like everybody, like everybody else, I think it's a great forum, and I've been talking to people in other countries about it and saying how I think this would be a great thing for you to be setting up, because I just think it's fantastic. So for me,
we can be international. We can be international and do it for them. We can make it. Go ahead. Yeah.
My highlight I've got is maybe a bit of a different one, which is the impact of Virginia Giuffre's memoir, and I think it has been really hugely significant. And I think I mean, obviously it's really tragic that she's not here to see the impact, but I think it is hugely significant. And I guess then for me, kind of looking to the future, it is, we really have to think about prevention in its widest sense, but actually be serious. We actually need to be serious about what does prevention look like, and how do we get from where we are to much lower levels of violence against women and girls. And for me, I guess part of that is we have to do more about the sex trade, and particularly we have to do more about the proliferation of pornography and how it is changing and impacting how sex is viewed and how women are viewed and all of that. So yeah, those would be the things I'd say.
Well, I mean, you're echoing our key messages. I mean, that's our whole organization is about prevention and primary prevention, you know, stopping it before it starts. So thank you for your inputs throughout the year. And Marie-Claire, Lorna, I'll go to you, and then I think Marie-Claire is there as well.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very early stages coming on to this forum, but I think it's been a fantastic learning experience for myself. The information knowledge sharing is fantastic. And I can see that, you know, this is actually growing. I would like to see my work. I do work with young people a lot as well, like Kelly. And I think that, you know, the books that were released to the libraries and what you've done with that has been amazing. I don't know if you have plans to get some of those books into the local secondary schools. I just think that there are a lot of issues in secondary schools, and I think that if we had some sort of, or if there was a development of some sort of program that went into schools to discuss the issues of gender-based violence, because if we're to change the, you know, the perspectives on this long term, we need to start with young people now.
Yeah. And if I could just say there, Lorna, because the Coen, the next role that they've taken someone on specifically to look at rolling out training nationally in all different areas. So that'll be next year's. And that was one of the things I kept pushing every time I met Stephanie about prevention, if she turned her brilliant brain to prevention and education, and she has now done that. So there will be someone,
Brilliant.
and I think it'll be brilliant to have forums where we can talk. I mean, the very basics is what I think yourself and Hilary are saying, and who else? Somebody else said that people, because of the impact of social conditioning and pornography and social media, people do not know what a healthy, it's that basic now. They don't know what a healthy relationship is, and they don't know what an unhealthy relationship is. And that's where we have to start. So, yeah, Lorna, and with your work, any thoughts for 2026 in this area?
Definitely, I think as a European Climate Ambassador, I have been talking with the Secretariat on this. I think that we need to include this as part of the climate issues and gender-based violence. I just think that it's definitely not been discussed here in Ireland, because there's this misconception that it's not, climate is not really affecting us. But when you look at the farmers and other people rural, it is affecting people, and it's going to affect us more. So we need to start mitigating that now and start opening up those conversations. So because
Great, so you're bringing these messages to European level. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that has to be done. Yeah.
Yeah. So does anyone else, Sarah, yourself, anyone else want to say anything before we finish up?
Well, I just want to say that I'm kind of conscious I wasn't going to say anything, because I feel like being involved in Haven, it seems like self-praise is no praise. But just personally, even though I do work for Haven, I absolutely love Lunch and Learn, especially as it's gone on, because it's just so interesting to meet people from different walks of life who are operating in different spheres, and you get all sorts of perspectives that no matter how many books you read, I mean, it's very valuable reading books, obviously, but you won't get some of those perspectives. They're unique to someone's experiential knowledge, and that's just been very interesting, I have to say.
Okay, and Sarah, just to let you know, you hadn't your camera on there, but that's fine. So anyone else want to say anything before we finish up? And you can come in, put up your hand, but I just want to say a few things about Haven Horizons. We are a very small organization. We don't even have full-time staff. I'm the only person who's full-time. We have Katrina, who you see there, who does amazing stuff in all areas, and in the background with the technology we have Sharon and Sarah, whose camera's not on at the moment, and Michelle, who's here, who just recently, there's Marie coming in now, Claire Marie, I'll let her speak when she comes in, and so we are one full-time and 3 part-time people, and we have no government or CUAN funding at all. And so we are running everything we do off the back of a charity shop. But we want that to change in 2026, and we want to put our message about prevention on the national and international agenda. Before we finish, I just want to say that one of the things that strikes me is, from what everybody's saying, is that there are 4 pillars on the Istanbul Convention, and that the Istanbul Convention puts the responsibility onto each state that has signed up to it to address the issues under the 4 pillars. And the first pillar is protection, which is the front line, prosecution, which is putting the perpetrator into the picture and holding them accountable by the agencies of the state that have that role. The third one is prevention. And the fourth one is coordinated policies. So we haven't really got the first 2 sorted, but that's where most of the action takes place, dealing with the outcomes and the impact of the issue. But pillar 3 and 4 aren't even on the agenda or being discussed much, but they're coming onto the agenda now, because CUAN is the statutory agency that is going to be there no matter if the minister changes, no matter if the government changes. They will have a plan that Kelly Birmingham short-term impact. Yeah. So yeah, the short-term impacts are being addressed, but these longer-term issues and systems problems and the gaps in that multi-agency response, I've been saying this for,
and this, if I could just,
I think that is the reality, and that even something that doesn't get addressed a lot, the adult child to parents, and that's another issue that we will be looking into. But again, I want to say thank you to Sharon, Katerina, Sarah, and Michelle, who are here. Michelle is only recently with us, so I don't know if if she is on camera. Positive News in Italy, they're criminalised femicide. Great, Hillary's putting up. And to say thank you to everybody who did an input throughout the year, and some people who did too. Thank you, Hillary. And just to say that we will be looking at next year's, I suppose, agenda, and perhaps looking at it from a slightly different perspective. So many gaps have been identified, and we might focus on some of the gaps as we go along, and to really see where we can take closing those gaps. So a targeted approach. And you can hear from what's been said that there's a few common gaps that are impacting a lot of people's lives. So with that, yeah, Katerina, Michelle, Sarah, thank you. And that's really all I have to say. So